My son's text crushed me. "Dad, this cruise is just for us three. Tanya says you are too old and you will ruin the vibe. Family only." He sent that message while standing in the living room of a house I co-signed for. A house I put $200,000 of my own retirement savings into as collateral just so he could get a low interest rate. He thought I would just sit at home, water his plants, and watch his dog while he drank margaritas on my dime. He was wrong. I did not just cancel my ticket. I drove straight to the bank and removed my name from the mortgage. I withdrew the collateral, and I watched as their perfect life crumbled into dust. They lost the house. They lost the car. But that was just the beginning. Before I tell you how they ended up homeless and begging on my doorstep in the rain, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect goes both ways. Now let me tell you how a 68-year-old engineer taught his ungrateful family a lesson in structural failure. I have always been a man of precision. As a structural engineer for 40 years, my life was governed by load-bearing capacities, tensile strength, and the absolute certainty of mathematics. You do not guess in my line of work, because if you guess, bridges fall down and people die. I applied that same level of care to my retirement. I had planned this trip for 6 months. It was supposed to be a Caribbean cruise, a 10-day voyage through the turquoise waters of the Bahamas and down to Aruba. It was not just a vacation. It was a celebration of my 68th birthday, but more importantly, it was a chance to reconnect with my son, Brandon. My bedroom looked like a staging ground for a military operation. My vintage leather suitcase, the one I had bought in Italy 30 years ago, lay open on the bed. The leather still smelled rich and earthy, a scent that reminded me of better days when my wife was still alive, and we traveled the world together. I had spent the last hour folding my shirts with military precision. I had my crisp linen trousers, my evening wear for the captain's dinner, and yes, even a few colorful shirts that Brandon always teased me about. I chuckled to myself as I smoothed out a particularly bright blue shirt. I could already hear his voice. "Dad, you look like a walking neon sign." I missed that banter. Since he married Tanya 5 years ago, those moments of easy laughter had become rare, replaced by a stiff formality that I could never quite figure out. I checked my folder of documents for the 3rd time. Boarding passes, passports, insurance, and the most important piece of paper, the receipt for the upgrade. Originally, we were all booked in standard balcony rooms, but last week I had secretly called the cruise line and paid $5,000 to upgrade all of us to the Grand Suite. It had a wraparound private deck, a personal butler, and exclusive access to the VIP lounge. I wanted to surprise them when we boarded. I wanted to see Tanya's face light up. I wanted to prove to her that I was not just the old man who came over for Sunday dinner and fell asleep in the armchair. I wanted to be the hero of the trip. I was humming a tune, zipping up the side pocket of my toiletry bag, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The sound was sharp against the silence of my house. I walked over expecting a confirmation from the taxi service I had booked to take us all to the airport the next morning. It was a text from Brandon. I put on my reading glasses, smiling, thinking maybe he was asking if I had packed enough sunscreen. The smile died on my lips before I even finished the first sentence. "Dad, Tanya thinks it is best if you do not come on this cruise. We need some space as a nuclear family. She says the itinerary is too active for you and you will just be exhausted. It is better if you stay home. We can do a dinner when we get back. Also, can you stop by and feed Buster while we are gone?" Thanks. I read it once. Then I read it again. I took off my glasses and cleaned them with the hem of my shirt, thinking perhaps a smudge of dust had distorted the words. I put them back on. The words remained the same. Family only. The phrase echoed in my empty house. Family only. I looked around my bedroom. On the dresser sat a framed photo of me and Brandon at his college graduation. I had paid for that degree. Next to it was a photo of Brandon and Tanya on their wedding day. I had paid for the open bar and the venue. I looked at the confirmation email for the grand suite lying on my desk. I had paid for that too. I was not family. I was a resource. I was a utility like electricity or running water noticed only when I stopped flowing. My chest tightened. For a moment, I thought it was my heart. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the mattress groaning under my weight. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. I took a deep breath, forcing my lungs to expand. I am an engineer, I told myself. Analyze the stress point. Identify the failure. The failure was not in my heart. It was in my blind loyalty. I looked at the suitcase. 10 minutes ago, it was a vessel of hope. Now it was just a pile of clothes. I did not feel sadness. That was the strange part. I expected to feel heartbreak, but what I felt was a cold, creeping numbness that started in my fingertips and worked its way up to my brain. It was the feeling of a switch being flipped. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the call button. I could call Brandon. I could beg. I could promise to be invisible, to just stay in my cabin and not bother them. I could tell him about the grand suite surprise. I could try to buy my way back into their good graces. No. A structure built on a rotten foundation cannot be saved by a fresh coat of paint. It has to be condemned. I dialed the number for the cruise line instead. The hold music was a cheerful steel drum melody that sounded like a mockery. Thank you for calling Royal Caribbean. This is Sarah. How can I help you? Hello, Sarah. My name is Richard Sterling. Booking reference Alpha Bravo 69er. One moment, Mr. Sterling. I see you are traveling with us tomorrow. A grand suite, how wonderful. Are you calling to confirm your dining reservations? I said, my voice steady, devoid of any tremor. I am calling to cancel. Oh, I am so sorry to hear that. Is everything all right? If it is a medical emergency, we can. It is not a medical emergency. I cut her off. It is a personnel issue. I need to cancel my ticket. I understand. Since it is less than 24 hours before departure, I am afraid there is no refund for the ticket cost. I do not care about the refund, I said. Cancel my ticket. And Sarah, yes, Mr. Sterling. I paid for the upgrade on the other 2 passengers in the cabin next to mine. Brandon and Tanya Sterling. That was charged to my card ending in 4550. Yes, I see that here. A generous gift. Remove it. Excuse me, remove the upgrade. Cancel the grand suite for the other party as well. Revert them to their original booking class. Actually verify if their original booking was fully paid. Let me check. It looks like the original booking deposit was paid by you as well, Mr. Sterling, but the final balance for the standard room was scheduled to be charged to your card today. Cancel it all. Sir, if I cancel the payment for the room balance, their reservation will be voided. They will not be allowed to board. I know how the math works, Sarah. Cancel it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Sarah typing furiously. Mr. Sterling, if I do this, your son and his wife will arrive at the port and have no cabin. The ship is fully booked. They will be stranded. I closed my eyes. I pictured Brandon sending that text. I pictured Tanya telling him I was too old. Do it, I said. And Sarah. Send the cancellation confirmation only to my email. Do not notify the secondary passengers. I want it to be a surprise. Done, she whispered, sounding a little terrified. Is there anything else? No. Thank you. I hung up. The room was silent again. I looked at the suitcase. I stood up, walked over to it, and flipped the lid closed. I did not unpack. I was not staying home to feed the dog. I walked to my closet and pulled out a different set of keys. Not the keys to my sedan, but the keys to my old pickup truck, the one I used for site inspections. I put on my coat. I was not going to sit here and rot. I needed to see it. I needed to see the structural failure with my own eyes. I drove to Brandon's house. It was a 40-minute drive to the suburbs, to a neighborhood of manicured lawns and pretension that I had subsidized. I had co-signed the mortgage on that colonial-style 4-bedroom house 3 years ago because Brandon's credit score was mediocre and Tanya demanded a zip code that would impress her yoga friends. As I turned onto their street, I saw the cars. It was not a quiet evening of packing for a nuclear family. It was a party. There were 6 or 7 cars lining the driveway and the street. I recognized the flashy BMW of Tanya's best friend. I heard the thumping bass of music vibrating through the air. A banner was strung across the porch pillars. Bon voyage. I parked my truck 2 houses down under the shade of a large oak tree. I turned off the engine and rolled down the window. The evening air was cool, but my blood was boiling hot. I stepped out of the truck. I did not walk up the driveway. I knew the layout of this property better than they did. I had inspected the drainage myself. I crept along the side of the neighbor's hedge, moving through the shadows until I reached the side of the house. The living room window was open to let in the breeze. I stood there hidden by a large rhododendron bush, and I watched. The living room was full of people laughing, drinking wine, and eating from a charcuterie board that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. Brandon was in the center of the room, holding a glass of champagne. He looked flushed and happy. He did not look like a son who was heartbroken about leaving his father behind. But what froze me in place was not Brandon. It was the couple standing next to him. A man and a woman roughly my age, maybe a few years younger, were standing there with suitcases. Designer suitcases. Louis Vuitton. It was Tanya's parents, the Davises. I had met them only a handful of times. They were people who smiled with their teeth, but never with their eyes. They were constantly talking about their investments and their high society connections, yet I knew for a fact they had filed for bankruptcy twice in the last decade. Tanya was clapping her hands for attention. "Okay, everyone, toast time," she shrieked. The room went quiet. Tanya raised her glass. "Here is to the trip of a lifetime. 10 days of sun, sea, and no responsibilities. And a special shout-out to my mom and dad for being able to join us at the last minute." The crowd cheered. Last minute, I gritted my teeth. You do not get on a cruise ship last minute without passport clearances and bookings. This had been planned. They had been the plan all along. One of Tanya's friends, a woman with too much filler in her lips, laughed. "But Tanya, what about Brandon's dad? I thought he was paying for the upgrade?" I held my breath. I leaned closer to the window, the thorns of the rose bush scratching my arm, but I did not feel it. Tanya rolled her eyes. The gesture was so dismissive, so practiced, it made my stomach turn. "Ugh, do not mention him. We handled it. Rick is he is too much. He is depressing, you know. He smells like Old Spice and mothballs, and he always wants to talk about structural engineering. Who wants to hear about load-bearing walls while drinking a mojito?" The room erupted in laughter. Brandon laughed too. That was the sound that broke me. My son laughed. Besides, Tanya continued taking a sip of her wine. He served his purpose. He wrote the check for the deposit. We just told him it was a family bonding thing, and he was too frail to keep up. He bought it hook, line, and sinker. The old man is a walking wallet, nothing more. Now we have the suite, we have the upgrade, and we have my parents who are actually fun. Win-win? Her mother, Mrs. Davis, chimed in. "And we certainly appreciate the upgrade, sweetie. I simply cannot do a standard cabin. I need my space." Brandon put his arm around Tanya. "Yeah, it is going to be great. Dad is fine. He likes being alone anyway. He has his puzzles or whatever. He probably felt relieved we let him off the hook." I stood there in the dark. My hands were shaking. Not from age, not from cold, from a rage so pure, so white-hot, that I felt like I could melt the siding off the house just by touching it. I served my purpose. A walking wallet. Smells like mothballs. I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, The boy I had sat up with when he had the flu. The young man I had bailed out of credit card debt 3 times in his 20s. The man I had just bought a house for. He was a stranger. I backed away from the window slowly. I did not storm in. I did not throw a brick through the glass. That would have been emotional. That would have been messy. I am an engineer. I do not create messes. I fix them. And sometimes fixing a structure means demolishing it completely so you can clear the site. I walked back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel. My heart rate slowed down. My breathing evened out. The numbness returned, but this time it was armor. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 4:45 in the afternoon. The bank closed at 5. I started the engine. I did not look back at the house with the Bon Voyage banner. I put the truck in gear and drove. I arrived at the First National Bank branch 12 minutes later. The sign on the door said closing soon, but the manager, Mr. Henderson, was still at his desk. He knew me. I had banked there for 40 years. I walked in my boots, clicking on the marble floor. "Rick." "Good to see you," Mr. Henderson said, standing up and extending a hand. "I thought you were off to the Bahamas tomorrow." "Plans changed," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "Oh, that is a shame. What can I do for you?" "Last-minute travel cash?" "No," I said. I sat down in the chair opposite him. I placed my hands flat on his mahogany desk. "I want to talk about the mortgage on 124 Maple Drive. The one I co-signed for my son." "Ah, yes. The adjustable rate mortgage. You put up your $200,000 certificate of deposit as collateral to secure the prime rate. A very generous gift, Rick. Brandon is lucky to have you." "He was," I said. Mr. Henderson's smile faltered. "Was I want to withdraw the collateral?" Mr. Henderson blinked. "I am sorry. You want to withdraw the CD. Rick, you know you cannot just do that. That money is the security for the loan. If you remove the collateral, the loan terms are violated." "I know. There will be penalties. Significant penalties for breaking the CD term early. You might lose $5,000 or $6,000 in interest. I do not care. And the loan. Rick, if you pull that security, the bank will have to reassess the risk immediately. Brandon's interest rate was locked in at 3% because of your cash backing. Without it, given his credit score and the current market, it will jump to the standard subprime rate, maybe 9.5%. And that is if we do not call the loan entirely." "Call the loan," I said. Mr. Henderson took off his glasses. "Rick, are you sure? This is the nuclear option. If we reassess, Brandon will likely get a notification demanding a refinance or a massive cash injection within 30 days. If he cannot pay, the foreclosure process begins." I looked Mr. Henderson in the eye. 30 days is too generous," I said, "but it will have to do." "But why did something happen?" "He told me I was too old to be part of the family," I said simply. "So I am removing the old money from the family equation. Let's see how they like the new math." Mr. Henderson looked at me for a long time. He saw the resolve in my face. He nodded slowly, opened his drawer, and pulled out a form. "Okay, Rick. It is your money. Sign here." I signed. The pen scratched against the paper, a harsh final sound. "Processing this now," Mr. Henderson said, typing on his keyboard. "The system will automatically generate an email notification to the primary borrower immediately. Brandon will get an alert on his phone in about 3, 2, 1. Sent." I stood up. "Thank you, Bob." I walked out of the bank and into the setting sun. I checked my watch. 5:02 p.m. Back at the house on Maple Drive, the party was probably still going. They were probably toasting to their free trip. They were probably laughing about the old man. But in about 30 seconds, Brandon's phone was going to ding. And this time, it would not be a text from me. It would be a text from reality. I got in my truck and drove home. I had a lot of work to do. The cruise ship was leaving tomorrow, and I wasn't going to be on it. But neither were they. And when they came back to dry land, they were going to find that the ground beneath their feet had simply ceased to exist. I slept like a baby that night. The next morning, I woke up, made a pot of coffee, and sat on my porch. At 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was Brandon. I let it ring. Then it rang again. Tanya. I let it ring. Then came the texts. Dad. What did you do? We are at the port and they say we have no reservation. Dad, pick up the bank, just emailed me saying my mortgage payment is going up to $6,000 a month. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted rich and dark, just the way I like it. I watched a cardinal land on the bird feeder. I picked up my phone, but not to answer. I opened my banking app. I transferred the $200,000 I had reclaimed into my high-yield savings account. Then I opened the text thread with Brandon. I typed one message. I am just an old man, Brandon. I probably messed up the paperwork. I would help, but I am too busy feeding the dog. Enjoy the staycation. I turned off my phone. Phase 1 was complete. But I knew them. They wouldn't give up that easily. They would come here. They would scream. They would threaten. They would try to manipulate me with tears. Let them come. I was a structural engineer. I knew how to build walls that could withstand a hurricane. And I had just started pouring the concrete. Little did they know the mortgage was just the opening shot. The real weapon was buried in the county clerk's office in a document filed 20 years ago that they sitter to read. I stood up and went to the garage. I needed my toolbox. It was time to do some maintenance on their house while they were stuck at the port. After all, as a co-owner, I had a legal obligation to ensure the property was up to code. And if that meant taking the front door off its hinges, well, safety first. The air conditioning inside the First National Bank branch was set to a temperature that felt sterile, almost clinical. It was the kind of cold that preserved things, kept them from rotting. I walked across the polished marble floor, my boots making a heavy rhythmic sound that echoed off the high ceilings. I had walked this same path 3 years ago, but on that day, my step had been lighter. On that day, I had walked in here with my son, Brandon, to sign the papers that would give him his dream home. Today, I was walking in alone to burn that dream to the ground. Bob Henderson, the branch manager, was sitting in his glass-walled office at the back. He saw me approaching, and a wide, professional smile broke across his face. Bob was a good man, a family man. He had been handling my accounts for nearly 2 decades. He stood up, smoothing his tie, and extended a hand as I opened the door. "Rick, good to see you," Bob said, his voice booming with that practiced banker cheerfulness. "I did not expect to see you until you got back. I thought you were setting sail for the Caribbean tomorrow morning." I shook his hand, but I did not smile back. I kept my face neutral, the same expression I used to wear when I had to tell a client that their building's foundation was cracking and needed a total retrofit. "Plans changed, Bob," I said, taking the leather seat opposite his mahogany desk. "I am not going on the cruise." Bob's smile faltered just a fraction. He sat down slowly, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Oh, I am sorry to hear that. Everything okay with the health?" "My health is fine," I said. "It is my portfolio I am worried about." Bob chuckled nervously, shifting some papers on his desk. "Well, you know your retirement accounts are solid, Rick. We just did the quarterly review. You are low risk, steady growth. Nothing to worry about." "I am not here for the IRA," I said. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the cool surface of his desk. "I am here about the mortgage on 124 Maple Drive." Bob paused. He took off his wire-rimmed glasses and began to polish them with a microfiber cloth. The silence in the room grew heavy. He knew exactly which loan I was talking about. It was the loan that had been the topic of much discussion 3 years ago. "Ah, yes, Brandon's mortgage," he said, putting his glasses back on. "Is there an issue with the payment?" "I believe he is on autopay." "The issue is not with the payment, Bob. The issue is with the security." I took a deep breath. I needed to explain this clearly. I needed him to understand that this was not a rash decision, but a calculated structural demolition. 3 years ago, I said, keeping my voice steady, my son came to me. He wanted that colonial house on Maple Drive. Tanya insisted on it. But Brandon's credit score was sitting in the low 600s because of those credit cards he maxed out in his 20s. And his income-to-debt ratio was too high. No bank would touch him. Not for a $600,000 loan. Bob nodded. "I remember. We could not underwrite it." "Not traditionally." "Correct," I continued. So I stepped in. I did not just co-sign Bob. Co-signing was not enough to get him the prime interest rate he needed to afford the monthly payments. To get that 3% fixed rate, I had to secure the loan. I had to put skin in the game. "You did," Bob agreed. "You pledged a certificate of deposit. $200,000 of your own cash locked in a holding account as collateral. That $200,000 was the only reason the bank felt safe lending money to my son," I said. "It was the load-bearing wall of his financial existence. It reduced your risk to zero. If he defaulted, you kept my money. That is why you gave him 3% interest when the market was climbing to 5. "That is correct," Bob said slowly. "It is a secured loan arrangement. The CD backs the mortgage. As long as the money is there, the rate stays low." "I want to withdraw the CD," I said. The air conditioning hummed. A teller outside dropped a stack of coins, the metallic crash ringing out like a gunshot. Bob stared at me. He blinked once, then twice. "I beg your pardon. I want to close the certificate of deposit. I want my $200,000 transferred back to my personal savings account. Today." Bob let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Rick, you cannot be serious. You know how this works. That money is frozen. It is the collateral. You cannot just take it back while the mortgage is still active. It is tied to the house note." "I am an engineer, Bob," I said coldly. "I read the fine print. I read every line of that contract before I signed it. There is a clause. Section 4, paragraph B. The voluntary collateral withdrawal clause." Bob frowned. He turned to his computer and began typing furiously. I watched his eyes scan the screen. I saw the moment he found it. His eyebrows shot up. "Okay," he said, his voice dropping. "Yes, technically there is a provision. But Rick, it is a penalty clause. It is designed to stop people from doing exactly what you are asking. If you break the CD term early to withdraw the funds, you forfeit all the accrued interest for the last 24 months. That is nearly $6,000 you are throwing away." I pulled my checkbook out of my pocket. "I do not care about the $6,000, I said. "I will write you a check for the penalty if I have to, or you can deduct it from the principal. Just give me my money." Bob stopped typing. He swiveled his chair to face me fully. He looked concerned, now genuinely concerned. This was not just business anymore. "Rick, listen to me. It is not just about the penalty fee. You have to understand the chain reaction this will trigger. That $200,000 is the only thing anchoring Brandon's mortgage terms." "I know," I said. "If you pull that security, the loan becomes unsecured," Bob explained, his voice rising slightly. "The bank's risk assessment software will immediately flag the account. We will be contractually obligated to uncap the interest rate." I nodded. I knew the math. I had done the calculations in my head on the drive over. "He is paying 3% now," I said. "What is the current street rate for an unsecured borrower with a 600 credit score?" Bob looked at his screen again. He winced. Rick, it is brutal out there right now. The Fed raised rates 3 times this year. For a high-risk borrower, we are looking at subprime territory, 9.5%, maybe 10. So his monthly payment triples, I said. It is worse than that, Bob said, leaning forward. Because the loan-to-value ratio will be thrown off balance, the bank will likely demand a terrifying thing called a margin call. We will send a notice demanding he either replace the collateral with cash or refinance the entire loan under the new terms within 30 days. If he cannot do that, we begin foreclosure proceedings. 30 days, I repeated. Bob looked at me pleadingly. Rick, you are talking about putting your son on the street. If his payment triples, can he afford it? No, I said. He cannot. He barely makes the payments now. Tanya spends whatever is left over on designer handbags and brunch. Then why? Bob asked. Why would you do this? Did you guys have a fight? Is this about the cruise? I looked past Bob out the glass wall to the busy street outside. People were walking by, living their lives oblivious to the fact that their foundations could crumble at any moment. He told me I was too old, I said softly. He told me I was not family. He said I was just a checkbook. Bob went silent. So I am showing him what happens when the checkbook closes, I said. I turned back to look Bob in the eye. I am showing him the difference between a load-bearing wall and a decoration. He thinks he is a self-made man. He thinks he owns that house. He is about to learn that he is just a tenant living on my good graces. And the lease is up. Bob stared at me for a long time. He saw that there was no negotiation. He saw the resolve of a man who had been pushed past his breaking point. He sighed a long, heavy exhale of defeat. Okay, Rick. It is your money. He printed out a stack of documents. The printer whirred, spitting out page after page of legalese. Bob slid the stack across the desk towards me along with a black ballpoint pen. You need to initial here, here, and here, Bob said, pointing to the yellow highlighted boxes. This acknowledges that you understand the penalties. This one acknowledges that you are removing the security instrument. And this last one. He hesitated. This last one authorizes the bank to send an immediate notification of material change to the primary borrower. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand like a weapon. As soon as I sign this, he gets an email, I asked. Bob nodded. An email, a text alert, and a certified letter in the mail. The system is automated. Once the collateral is released, the clock starts ticking. He will have 30 days to come up with $200,000 or refinance at 9.5%. I uncapped the pen. I thought about the text message on my phone. Family only. I thought about the smirk on Tanya's face that I had seen through the window. I thought about the $200,000 that represented 40 years of waking up at 5 in the morning, climbing scaffolding, freezing on construction sites, and missing dinners with my late wife because I was working overtime to build a future for that boy. I signed my name, Richard Sterling. The letters were sharp, angular, precise. I flipped the page, initialed, flipped, signed. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a bridge being dismantled bolt by bolt. There, I said, pushing the stack back to Bob. Bob took the papers. He looked at them one last time as if hoping to find an error that would stop this. He found none. He typed a command into his keyboard and hit enter. It is done, Bob said quietly. The funds have been transferred to your savings. The notification has been sent. I stood up. I felt strange. I expected to feel guilty. I expected to feel the weight of what I had just done. But instead, I felt lighter. I felt like I had been carrying a heavy rucksack for 3 years, and I had finally set it down. Thank you, Bob, I said. Rick, Bob said, as I turned to leave. If he calls, what should I tell him? Tell him to read the contract, I said. I walked out of the bank. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I checked my watch. It was 5:15. Brandon and Tanya would be on the ship now. They would be standing on the deck, holding their cocktails, watching the shoreline fade away. They would be toasting to their freedom. They would be laughing about how they tricked the old man. And then in a few seconds, Brandon's phone would vibrate in his pocket. He would pull it out, expecting a like on his Instagram photo. Instead, he would see a notification from First National Bank. Subject: urgent notice of collateral withdrawal and rate adjustment. I got into my truck and started the engine. I did not turn on the radio. I just drove, listening to the hum of the tires on the asphalt. I had taken back my foundation. The collapse was inevitable. Now all I had to do was wait for the dust to settle. But I was not going home to wait. I had one more stop to make. The bank was just the financial demolition. Now I needed to attend to the physical structure. I drove toward the hardware store. I needed a heavy-duty drill and a crowbar. If I was going to be the villain in their story, I might as well play the part to perfection. While I was enjoying the silence of my empty house 300 miles away, the icon of the seas was pushing away from the dock in Miami. I can only imagine the scene, but knowing Brandon and Tanya as well as I do not have to imagine it. I can see it. They would have walked onto that ship like they owned it. Tanya would have been wearing her oversized sunglasses and that ridiculous wide-brimmed hat she bought just for Instagram photos. Her parents, Bill and Linda Davis, would be trailing behind them, complaining about the heat, while simultaneously eyeing the buffet line like sharks smelling blood. They headed straight for the Grand Suite on Deck 17. I had sent them the room number weeks ago. It was a beautiful room. Velvet curtains, a private balcony with a jacuzzi, and a dedicated butler named Jerome. I bet they threw their bags on the king-sized bed and popped the bottle of complimentary champagne that I had paid for before I canceled the card. They stood on the balcony, watching the Miami skyline fade into the distance, clinking glasses to their good fortune. Tanya probably posted a photo right then. Caption: living our best life. No negativity allowed. The trouble started at dinner. They decided to skip the main dining room and go to the ship's exclusive steakhouse, Chops Grill. It is the kind of place where a steak costs more than a car payment, and the wine list is thicker than a Bible. They were celebrating after all. They were free of the old man. I can picture Brandon sitting at the head of the table, chest puffed out, playing the role of the provider. He ordered the seafood tower. He ordered the Wagyu beef. And then, to impress his father-in-law, he ordered a bottle of Chateau Margaux Vintage 2015. $500 a bottle. Bill Davis probably clapped him on the back. Now that is class, Brandon. I always knew you were doing well for yourself. Linda probably smiled, that tight fake smile of hers. Finally a vacation that fits our standards. They ate. They drank. They laughed about how easy it was to manipulate me. They probably made jokes about me sitting at home with a microwave dinner. Then the check came. Brandon reached into his wallet and pulled out the platinum card, the card with my name on it, the authorized user card that I had given him for emergencies, which he and Tanya had redefined to include luxury vacations. He dropped it onto the tray with a casual flick of the wrist. The waiter took it and walked away. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The laughter at the table started to die down. Brandon checked his watch. Tanya reapplied her lipstick. The waiter returned. He was not smiling anymore. He leaned down, keeping his voice low, discreet. "Sir, I am afraid this card has been declined." Brandon laughed. "That is impossible." "Try it again. It is a platinum card. It has no limit." "We tried it 3 times, sir. The system says the account has been closed by the primary cardholder. Do you have another form of payment?" The table went silent. Brandon's face turned a shade of red that matched the lobster shells on the table. He patted his pockets. He pulled out his own debit card. the one connected to his personal checking account. The account that, thanks to his mortgage payment, usually hovered around zero. He handed it over. "Try this one." The waiter walked away. He came back faster this time. "Declined, sir." "Insufficient funds." Bill Davis cleared his throat. It was a loud, judgmental sound. "Is there a problem, Brandon? I thought you said this was all taken care of?" "It is," Brandon stammered. "It must be a bank error. Dad probably forgot to authorize the travel notification. Let me call him." He pulled out his phone. No signal. They were 12 miles offshore. "Use the ship's Wi-Fi," Tanya hissed. "Fix this, Brandon. You are embarrassing my parents." But before Brandon could connect to the Wi-Fi, a man in a white uniform approached the table. He was not a waiter. He had gold bars on his shoulders. This was the guest services manager. He was flanked by 2 large security officers. "Mr. Brandon Sterling," the manager asked. "Yes," Brandon said, his voice cracking. "We have a serious issue with your reservation, sir. It appears the payment for the upgrade to the Grand Suite was reversed this afternoon. The credit card company signaled a fraudulent charge dispute initiated by the card owner, a Mr. Richard Sterling." Tanya stood up, knocking her chair over. "That is a lie. My father-in-law paid for that room. He is senile. He does not know what he is doing." The manager remained calm. "The cardholder was very clear, ma'am. He stated that unauthorized users were attempting to access premium services. Furthermore, since the upgrade was canceled, the balance for the suite is outstanding. That will be $12,000 for the week, plus the $500 for the wine you just consumed." "$12,000, Brandon whispered. "If you cannot provide a valid method of payment right now, we will have to ask you to vacate the suite immediately." Bill Davis threw his napkin on the table. "This is outrageous. I have never been so insulted in my life. Brandon, I thought you were a man of substance. Did you drag us onto this ship with no money?" "No, Dad." "Listen, it is Rick. He is being vindictive," Brandon pleaded. "I do not care who is being vindictive," Linda snapped. "I care that the waiter is looking at us like we are criminals." "Pay the man, Brandon. I can't," Brandon whispered. The manager nodded to the security guards. "Very well. Since the ship is fully booked, we cannot offer you the suite. However, we do have one emergency cabin available. It is an interior crew overflow cabin on Deck 2. You can stay there provided you pay the standard fare and the bill for this dinner immediately. If not, we will have to detain you in the holding room until we reach the next port in Nassau, where you will be disembarked." Tanya looked at her parents. "Mom, Dad, can you put it on your card?" "Just until we get hold of Rick." Bill Davis stood up and buttoned his jacket. "Absolutely not. I am not throwing my retirement money into a black hole because your husband is incompetent. We have our own cabin to pay for. Come on, Linda. Let's go to the casino. I have lost my appetite." They walked away. They left their own daughter and son-in-law standing there surrounded by security. Tanya turned on Brandon. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You useless idiot. You said he would never find out. You said he was too stupid to check the accounts." "Shut up," Tanya, Brandon yelled. "Just shut up and help me." They were escorted out of the steakhouse. They were marched back to the Grand Suite not to sleep, but to pack. Under the supervision of the security guards, they had to stuff their clothes back into their suitcases. They had to leave the balcony, the jacuzzi, and the velvet curtains. They were taken down in the service elevator, down past the promenade, down past the dining halls, down to Deck 2. The room smelled of diesel fuel and industrial cleaner. It was a windowless box barely large enough for a bunk bed. When the door closed, the darkness was absolute until Brandon found the light switch. The fluorescent bulb flickered to life, illuminating the gray metal walls. There was no cell service down there. Brandon had to go up to the common area to use the expensive satellite phone. That was when he called me. I was in my kitchen making a sandwich. I saw his number pop up. I let it go to voicemail. Then Tanya called. Voicemail. Then the texts started coming through via the ship's Wi-Fi. Dad, please pick up. We are in a room with no windows. Tanya's parents won't speak to us. They are threatening to kick us off in Nassau. Dad, I am sorry. I did not mean what I said in the text. You are family. Please turn the card back on. I listened to the voicemail later that night. Brandon was crying, actually sobbing. He sounded like a child who had lost his toy. But I also heard Tanya in the background. She was not crying. She was screaming. Tell him I will sue him. Tell him he cannot do this to me. I am a mother. She is not a mother yet, thank God. But she sounded like a banshee. I deleted the voicemail. I did not call back. Back on the ship, the nightmare was just beginning for them. Without a credit card, they could not buy drinks. They could not eat at the specialty restaurants. They were stuck eating the free pizza at the buffet for every meal. And the worst part, they had to watch Tanya's parents living it up. The next morning, I heard from a friend of mine who happened to be on the same cruise. It is a small world, isn't it? He texted me a photo. It was Brandon and Tanya sitting by the pool. But they were not on the lounge chairs. Those were reserved for paying guests. They were sitting on their towels on the hard concrete deck. And a few feet away in a private cabana were Bill and Linda Davis drinking mojitos and laughing with a group of strangers. They were pretending they did not even know the couple sitting on the ground. My friend said he overheard Linda in the elevator. She was telling anyone who would listen, my daughter married a loser. He promised us a luxury cruise and then his card bounced. Can you imagine we have to distance ourselves? It is just so embarrassing. I zoomed in on the photo. Brandon looked sunburnt and miserable. Tanya looked like she was plotting a murder. They were trapped, stuck in a metal box in the middle of the ocean, with no money, no status, and no escape from the judgment of their own family. And the best part, they had absolutely no idea that while they were suffering in that windowless room, wondering how they would pay their way home from Nassau, the real demolition was happening back on Maple Drive. I finished my sandwich and washed the plate. I had a busy afternoon ahead of me. I had to meet with the demolition contractor to discuss the garage. I wondered if Brandon would notice if his garage was missing when he got back. Probably. But then again, he had bigger problems. The 30-day clock on the mortgage was ticking. And down in that cabin on deck, time probably felt like it was standing still. I poured myself a glass of wine. Not a $500 bottle, just a $20 Merlot. But it tasted better than anything they were drinking. It tasted like justice. While Brandon and Tanya were rotting in their windowless cabin somewhere off the coast of Florida, fighting over who would sleep on the top bunk, I was enjoying the most productive week of my life. The suburbs are exceptionally quiet on a Tuesday morning. It is a silence that screams of order, of routine, of mortgages being paid and lawns being watered. I pulled my truck into the driveway of 124 Maple Drive at exactly 8 in the morning. I sat there for a moment, sipping my coffee, looking at the house. It was a perfectly fine house. To the untrained eye, it looked pristine. The siding was white, the shutters were black, and the hydrangeas Tanya had planted using my money were blooming blue. But I do not have an untrained eye. I am a structural engineer. I see the world in terms of potential failure points. And as I looked at that house, the house I legally owned 50% of, I decided it was a death trap. I stepped out of the truck carrying my clipboard and a thick roll of orange adhesive tape. I walked up the path, the same path Brandon had walked down 1,000 times, thinking he was the king of his castle. I took out my key. It slid into the lock with a satisfying click. I turned it. The door swung open. Legally, I was untouchable. The deed listed us as joint tenants. In the state of Connecticut, a joint tenant has the full right to access, improve, and maintain the property to protect the value of the asset. If I suspected, in my professional opinion, that the house was structurally compromised, I had not just a right, but a duty to intervene. I walked inside. The air was stale. It smelled of Tanya's expensive vanilla candles and the lingering scent of ungratefulness. I started my inspection. I walked to the living room windows. Double-hung vinyl casing. Perfectly functional. I tapped the glass. Thermal failure, I whispered to myself, making a note on my clipboard. The seals are likely compromised. These windows are letting in drafts. They are energy inefficient. As a responsible owner, I cannot allow my son to pay high heating bills. They need to be removed for off-site refurbishment. I moved to the kitchen, the sliding glass door that led to the patio. I slid it back and forth. It squeaked. Bearing failure on the track assembly, I noted. Safety hazard. If this door jams during a fire, they could be trapped. It has to go. I went to the basement. This was the heart of the operation. The furnace. It was a high-efficiency gas unit installed only 3 years ago. It hummed quietly. I looked at the ventilation pipe. I squinted. Was that a hairline crack in the PVC joint? Probably not. But could I be 100% sure? No. And in engineering, if you are not 100% sure, you shut it down. Carbon monoxide risk, I wrote in big block letters. Critical system failure. Immediate decommissioning required. I checked my watch. So, 8:30. The crew would be here any minute. I had not hired a demolition crew. That would look suspicious. I had hired a window and door restoration specialist, a guy I had known for years named Miller. He was the best in the business, and he charged a fortune. I told him I wanted every external door and window in the house removed and taken to his workshop for a full seal restoration and glass replacement. I told him I wanted it done this week while the family was away. I paid him $10,000 cash up front. Miller pulled up in his van a few minutes later, followed by 2 flatbed trucks. He hopped out, looking confused. "Rick, are you sure about this?" Miller asked, looking at the house. "These windows look brand new. They are defective, Miller," I said, handing him the work order. "Manufacturer recall on the weather stripping. Just take them out. Board up the openings with plywood for security. I want the frames stripped, sanded, and reglazed. Take your time. Do a good job. Maybe take 3 or 4 months." Miller shrugged. "You are the boss, Rick, and you are the engineer." I watched as his crew went to work. There is a specific sound a house makes when you start taking it apart. It is a groaning sound. The sound of screws being reversed, of caulk being sliced, of wood being pried away from wood. It was music to my ears. First, the front door came off. The heavy, solid oak door that Tanya loved because she thought it looked aristocratic. 2 guys lifted it off the hinges and carried it to the truck like a coffin. Then the living room windows. Pop, pop, pop. The house began to lose its eyes. The wind started to blow through the living room, ruffling the curtains and knocking over a stack of fashion magazines on the coffee table. Mrs. Higgins, the neighbor from across the street, came out to her porch. She was wearing a floral robe and holding a cat. She hurried over her slippers, slapping on the asphalt. "Mr. Sterling, is everything all right?" "What is happening?" I adjusted my hard hat. "Oh, hello, Martha. Just some emergency maintenance. We found some dry rot in the jams. Very dangerous. Mold spores. You know how sensitive Tanya is to allergies." "Oh, my mold!" Martha gasped, clutching her cat tighter. "That is terrible. Is it safe?" "That is why we are opening it up," I said solemnly. "Needs to breathe. Don't worry, we will have it boarded up by tonight. It will be secure. Just airy." She nodded, looking at the gaping hole where the front door used to be. "Well, you are such a good father taking care of things while they are on vacation." I smiled. I try, Martha. I try. By noon, the house was a skeleton. Every window was gone. The front door was gone. The back door was gone. The sliding patio door was gone. The house looked surprised, like someone had punched it in the face. But I was not done. I led the HVAC technician into the basement. "Disconnect it," I said, pointing to the furnace. The tech looked at me. "Sir, it is October. It is going to get down to 40 degrees tonight." "I know," I said. "But this unit is vibrating. I suspect a heat exchanger crack. I cannot risk my family's safety. Take the unit out. I want it brought to your shop for a full diagnostic, but we can just test it here." "Take it out," I commanded. "I want a bench test." They wrestled the furnace out of the basement. It left a gaping hole in the concrete floor and a disconnected gas line which they capped off safely. Now the house had no eyes, no mouth, and no heart. By 4 in the afternoon, the crew was finishing up. They nailed heavy sheets of plywood over the window openings. It looked like a house preparing for a hurricane that had already hit. It looked abandoned. It looked derelict. When the last truck drove away, I was left alone in the driveway. The house was dark. Without windows, no light could get in. The plywood made it look like a crime scene. I walked up to the sheet of plywood that was nailed where the front door used to be. I took out my roll of orange tape and a staple gun. I pulled out a document I had drafted myself. It looked very official. It had the header of my engineering firm and a lot of bold text. "Notice of structural deficiency. Unsafe to occupy. Do not enter. Pending structural review." I stapled it to the plywood. Thwack, thwack, thwack. I stepped back to admire my handiwork. Tanya had always complained that the house felt too closed in. She wanted an open concept. She wanted a connection to the outdoors. Well, now she had it. The thermal envelope of the house was now non-existent. The interior temperature would match the exterior temperature perfectly. Tonight, it would be 42 degrees in the master bedroom. I imagined them coming home. I imagined the taxi pulling up. I imagined Tanya's face when she saw the plywood. I imagined Brandon trying to put his key into a lock that was currently sitting in a workshop 10 miles away. I took a photo of the front door with the orange notice. I did not send it to them. I saved it in a folder on my phone named The Renovation. I got back in my truck. My coffee was cold, but I drank it anyway. It tasted delicious. I drove away, leaving the house silent and blind. They had 7 days left on the cruise. 7 days of wondering why their credit cards were declined. And then the grand finale. The homecoming. I almost felt bad for the neighbors. They were going to hear a lot of screaming next week. But then again, Martha Higgins liked drama. I was just giving the neighborhood some free entertainment. I went home and fed Brandon's dog Buster. I gave him an extra treat. After all, he was the only member of that household who was actually happy to see me. "Good boy, Buster," I said, scratching him behind the ears. "Enjoy the heat while it lasts. You might need a sweater when your parents get back." I sat on my couch and turned on the TV. I felt a deep sense of calm. I had followed the rules. I had protected the asset. I had ensured safety. That is what engineers do. We fix problems. And sometimes the problem is the people living inside the house. The house was now purged. It was empty, cold, and stripped bare. Just like my relationship with my son. It was a perfect architectural metaphor. Now all I had to do was wait for the tenants to return and realize that their lease had expired in more ways than one. The lawsuit for the partition action would be the next step, but honestly, seeing them shivering in a house with no furnace would be satisfaction enough for now. The weather in Connecticut had turned. A cold front had moved in from Canada, dropping the temperature into the low 40s. The sky was a slate gray, promising rain, and the wind had a bite to it that cut right through fabric. I sat in my truck parked 2 houses down under the canopy of an oak tree with the heater running and a thermos of hot coffee in the cup holder. I had been waiting for 3 hours. I did not mind the wait. In my line of work, patience is not just a virtue, it is a requirement. You cannot rush the setting of concrete, and you cannot rush the collapse of a structure. At 2:15 in the afternoon, a yellow taxicab turned onto Maple Drive. It looked tired, its suspension sagging. I watched through my binoculars as it slowed down. I could see the silhouette of 2 people in the back seat. They were not leaning on each other. They were sitting as far apart as the bench seat allowed. The taxi stopped in front of 124 Maple Drive. I expected them to look tan and rested. Instead, they looked like refugees. Brandon stumbled out of the car first. He was wearing a thin linen shirt and shorts dressed for the tropical weather he had just left, not the biting New England autumn. His skin was peeling a patchwork of angry red sunburn and pale flakes. He looked thinner, haggard, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. Tanya climbed out the other side. She was wearing a straw hat that had been crushed in transit and a maxi dress that dragged on the damp pavement. She looked furious. They stood on the curb staring at the house. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just stood there, blinking, as if their brains were refusing to process the visual data. The house they had left 10 days ago had been a pristine colonial, with black shutters and a welcoming oak door. The house that stood before them now looked like a boarded-up foreclosure in a bad neighborhood. Sheets of raw plywood covered every single window opening. The front door was gone, replaced by a slab of particle board secured with heavy-duty screws. The orange tape I had applied fluttered aggressively in the wind. The notice I had stapled to the wood was bright and impossible to miss. "What the hell?" Brandon whispered. I could read his lips from 50 yards away. Tanya dropped her suitcase. It hit the ground with a thud. She took a few steps forward, her hands trembling. "Where is the door?" she shrieked. Her voice carried on the wind, sharp and hysterical. "Brandon." "Where is the front door? I do not know." Brandon stammered, shivering as a gust of wind hit his sunburned legs. Maybe there was a storm. Maybe Dad hired someone to fix something. Fix something. Tanya turned on him, her face twisting. "Does this look like fixing, Brandon? It looks like a war zone. Look at the windows. They are gone." She ran up the driveway, her sandals slapping against the asphalt. She pounded her fists against the plywood covering the front entrance. "Open up. Is anyone in there? Open this door right now." There was no answer, just the hollow thud of her fists against the wood. She turned around, scanning the street. She saw Mrs. Higgins peeking out from behind her curtains across the road. "Mrs. Higgins," Tanya yelled, waving her arms. "What happened? Who did this?" Mrs. Higgins immediately let the curtain fall back into place, disappearing from view. She was a smart woman. She knew better than to get involved in a demolition site. Tanya marched back to Brandon. "Call the police, now. I cannot." Brandon said, looking down at his phone. "My service is cut off." The bill was on the autopay with Dad's card. Tanya let out a scream of pure frustration. She grabbed his phone and threw it onto the grass. She pulled out her own phone. "I am calling 911. This is burglary. This is vandalism. Someone stripped our house while we were gone." I watched as she dialed. I watched her pace back and forth, gesturing wildly, screaming into the receiver. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was still hot. I gave them 5 minutes. I wanted the police to be dispatched before I made my move. When I saw the flashing lights of the cruiser turning the corner at the end of the block, I put the truck in gear. I drove slowly down the street and pulled into the driveway, blocking the taxi that was still waiting to be paid. I stepped out of the truck. I was wearing my heavy work coat and my steel-toed boots. I looked calm. I looked authoritative. Tanya saw me first. "You," she screamed, pointing a finger that shook with rage. "You did this. I know you did this. You psycho!" Brandon looked at me with a mix of fear and confusion. Dad. What is going on? Why are the windows boarded up? Hello, Brandon. Hello, Tanya, I said, leaning against the hood of my truck. Welcome back. How was the cruise? I heard the interior cabins can be quite cozy this time of year. You are sick. Tanya lunged toward me, but Brandon held her back. You destroyed our house. I just called the police. They are going to arrest you, I smiled. Arrest me for what, Tanya? For breaking and entering, for destruction of property. Look at this. We have no windows. We have no door. It is freezing. The police cruiser pulled up to the curb. 2 officers stepped out. One was a young rookie looking nervous. The other was an older sergeant, a man I recognized from the town council meetings. Sergeant Miller. What is the problem here? Sergeant Miller asked, his hand resting casually on his belt. We got a call about a break-in in progress. Officer, arrest him, Tanya yelled, pointing at me again. He destroyed our home. We just got back from vacation and he ripped the doors off. Sergeant Miller looked at the house, then at me. He frowned. Rick, is that you? Hello, Sergeant, I said. Is this true? Did you do this? I stood up straight. I reached into my coat pocket. I did not pull out a weapon. I pulled out a thick envelope containing the deed to the property and my engineering report. Officer, there seems to be a misunderstanding, I said calmly. As you can see from these documents, I am the joint owner of this property at 124 Maple Drive. My name is on the title. Sergeant Miller took the papers. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the deed. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship, he read aloud. Okay, so you own the house. Exactly, I said, and as a licensed structural engineer and the owner responsible for the asset. I conducted an emergency inspection last week. I discovered significant thermal failure in the fenestration units and a critical safety hazard in the entry mechanisms. I pointed to the orange notice stapled to the plywood. As per code, I removed the defective units for off-site repair. I have secured the building envelope with industry-standard materials to prevent unauthorized access and weather damage. I am simply performing necessary maintenance to protect my investment. Tanya's jaw dropped. Maintenance, you took the windows out. You took the front door. They were drafty, Tanya, I said. I want you to have the best. Energy efficiency is very important. Sergeant Miller looked at the house, then back at the papers. He tried to hide a smile. So let me get this straight, the sergeant said. You own the house and you are doing repairs, correct? And where are the doors and windows now? At a restoration shop in Hartford. I lied smoothly. They are being refinished. It is a slow process. Handcrafted work takes time. Maybe 3 months. Maybe 6. 6 months, Brandon shouted. Dad, we cannot live here. It is open to the air. I shrugged. I sealed it pretty tight with the plywood. But yes, the R value is significantly reduced. And I should mention the furnace was also vibrating, so I had that removed for safety testing. There is no heat. No heat, Tanya screeched. It is 40 degrees, Sergeant, I said, turning back to the officer. Is it a crime for a homeowner to repair his own property? Sergeant Miller handed the papers back to me. He looked at Tanya, then at Brandon. Ma'am, sir, this appears to be a civil matter. Mr. Sterling here is the legal owner of the property. He has the right to make repairs. We cannot arrest a man for working on his own house. But we live here, Tanya cried. We have rights. You are tenants, technically, I interjected. And as the landlord, I am informing you that the property is currently undergoing major renovation. You are welcome to stay, of course. But I would advise wearing a coat. Officer, do something, Tanya pleaded. He is making us homeless. Look. Sergeant Miller said, his tone shifting to one of finality. If you have a dispute about the living conditions, you can take him to housing court. You can file a civil suit. But right now there is no crime being committed. He has the deed. He has the right. The sergeant turned to me. Rick, maybe try to get those windows back in before snow falls. I will do my best, Sergeant. Quality takes time. The officers got back in their cruiser. Tanya ran after them, banging on the window, but they just drove away. She stood in the middle of the street, screaming obscenities that made Mrs. Higgins clutch her pearls behind her curtains. I watched the show. It was better than any Broadway play I had ever seen. Brandon walked over to the taxi driver who was leaning out of his window looking annoyed. "Buddy, are you paying or what?" the driver asked. "That is $85. Brandon patted his pockets. He looked at me. "Dad." I took a sip of coffee. "Don't look at me, son. I am just the maintenance guy." Brandon turned to Tanya. "Give me your emergency cash, the stash you keep in your purse." "I spent it on the ship," Tanya snapped. "To buy tampons because you couldn't pay for anything." The taxi driver turned off the meter. He opened his door and got out. He was a big man. "Look, I do not care about your family drama. I want my money. Now!" Brandon looked terrified. He looked at the cold, boarded-up house. He looked at his angry wife. He looked at his father, who was watching him with cold indifference. He pulled out his phone. He opened an app. It was one of those predatory payday loan apps. The kind that charges 400% interest. I watched him tap the screen. I saw him wince as he accepted the terms. "Approved," he muttered. He transferred the money and paid the driver. The taxi drove away, leaving them stranded on the sidewalk with their suitcases. "Now what?" Brandon asked, his voice breaking. "We cannot stay here. It is freezing, and there is no door." "We go to a hotel," Tanya spat. "A nice one. And we sue him. We sue him for everything he has." "With what money?" Brandon asked. "Just call the Uber," Tanya yelled. "Use the loan money." They stood there in the cold wind waiting for their ride. They shivered in their tropical clothes. Brandon tried to put his arm around Tanya for warmth, but she shoved him away. I finished my coffee. I screwed the cap back onto the thermos. I walked over to the front of the house right past them, as if they were invisible. I checked the tape on the plywood. I gave it a little pat to make sure it was secure. "Looks solid," I said to no one in particular. "Dad," Brandon said, "please, just tell us where the keys are. We can sleep in the basement. We have sleeping bags." I turned to him. "The basement? Wouldn't recommend that. Since I removed the furnace, the gas lines are capped. But you know, ventilation is tricky. Besides, I think I saw a rat down there. A big one." I walked back to my truck. "Where are you going?" Brandon cried out. "I am going home," I said. "To my house, which has windows and a furnace and a door that locks." I climbed into the cab. I rolled down the window one last time. "Oh, and Brandon, check your email. The bank sent you a notice about the mortgage. You might want to read it before you spend too much of that payday loan on a hotel room. You have a big payment coming up." I drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw them standing on the sidewalk, two small, shivering figures against the backdrop of a house that had turned its back on them. They were learning the hardest lesson of all. A house is made of wood and beam, but a home is built on respect. When you destroy the respect, the walls come tumbling down. I turned on the radio. It was playing a classic rock song. I turned up the volume. I had a partition action lawsuit to file in the morning, and I wanted to be well rested. They served me the papers on a Tuesday morning while I was having breakfast at my favorite diner. A young process server who looked like he was barely out of high school dropped a thick manila envelope onto my table right next to my scrambled eggs. He muttered a quick apology and bolted out the door as if he expected me to throw hot coffee at him. I did not. I simply wiped my mouth with a napkin, picked up the envelope, and slid out the contents. State of Connecticut Superior Court, Civil Division. Brandon and Tanya Sterling versus Richard Sterling. Complaint for partition by sale and damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I flipped through the pages. It was a masterpiece of fiction. Tanya had clearly dictated every word to whatever ambulance-chasing lawyer they had managed to hire with their payday loan money. They were claiming that my removal of the windows was an act of constructive eviction. They were claiming that I had created a hostile living environment. But the core of the lawsuit was the partition action. In legal terms, a partition action is what happens when two people own a property together and they cannot agree on how to use it. The court forces a sale and the money is split. Tanya was betting on the fact that I would not want to go through a public trial. She was betting that I would just write them a check for half the value of the house, about $300,000, just to make them go away. She thought she was playing chess. She did not realize she was playing on a board that I had built, designed, and patented 20 years ago. I called my lawyer Saul Cohen. Saul and I have been friends since Vietnam. He is a man who speaks softly, wears rumpled suits, and possesses a legal mind sharper than a diamond cutter. Saul, I said. They took the bait. I can hear the smile in his voice. I will book the conference room, Rick. Let's finish this. 3 days later, we met for a deposition and settlement conference at Saul's office in downtown Hartford. The room was lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with leather-bound law journals. The view from the window looked out over the city I had helped build. Brandon and Tanya arrived 10 minutes late. They looked terrible. Staying in a cheap motel had clearly taken its toll. Brandon's suit was wrinkled, and he looked like he had lost 10 pounds. Tanya, however, had clearly spent hours getting ready. She was wearing a sharp black dress and oversized sunglasses, trying to project an image of power. Their lawyer was a man I did not recognize, a guy named Prentice, with a shiny suit and a nervous tick in his left eye. They sat on one side of the long oak table. Saul and I sat on the other. Mr. Prentice cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. "Gentlemen, let's not waste time," he began, trying to sound authoritative. "My clients have suffered significant trauma due to Mr. Sterling's erratic and malicious behavior. The removal of the windows was a clear attempt to force them out of their own home. We are prepared to go to trial, and I assure you a jury will not look kindly on a father making his own son homeless." Saul steepled his fingers. "We are here to listen to your demands, Mr. Prentice." Tanya leaned forward. She could not help herself. She did not want her lawyer to talk. She wanted to do the talking. "I want full ownership," she spat. "We want Richard's name off the deed, immediately. And we want $200,000 in damages for the mental anguish and the cost of the hotel." I looked at her calmly. "Full ownership on what grounds? On the grounds that it is our home," Tanya shouted. "We live there. I picked out the paint colors, I planted the hydrangeas I made. That house a home, you just paid for it, but we put in the sweat equity. That makes us the primary owners, and since you abandoned the property by destroying it, you forfeited your rights." Brandon kept his head down, refusing to look at me. Tanya continued, her voice rising. "We know the law, Rick. It is called a partition action. The court will force you to sell your half to us. And since we have suffered damages, your share of the equity will go to us anyway. So just sign the papers. Give us the house, put the windows back in, and get out of our lives." Mr. Prentice nodded. "My client is correct in principle. If we litigate this, the legal fees alone will bankrupt you. It is a simple calculation. You give them the house, and we drop the harassment suit." Saul looked at me. I gave him a slight nod. It was time. Saul opened a thin file folder that had been sitting in front of him. He pulled out a single document. It was old. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges. Mr. Prentice, Saul said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have filed a partition action for the property located at 124 Maple Drive. Is that correct?" "Yes," Prentice said. "And your claim relies on the fact that Brandon Sterling and Richard Sterling are joint tenants of said property." "Obviously," Prentice scoffed. "We have the deed right here." Saul slid the yellow document across the table. That is the deed for the improvements, Saul said. Improvements? Tanya asked, confused. What are you talking about? Saul ignored her and looked at Prentice. You see, when Richard developed that subdivision 20 years ago, he structured the ownership in a very specific way. He created a company called Sterling Land Holdings, LLC. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. This was the part I had been waiting for. You see, Tanya, I said, breaking my silence. In real estate law, there is a difference between the house, the bricks, the wood, the roof, and the land that it sits on. Tanya looked at me like I was speaking Greek. Saul continued. Brandon's deed, the one you are waving around, grants him 50% ownership of the structure, the house itself. However, the land, the actual dirt, the driveway, the yard where you planted your hydrangeas, that is not owned by Brandon. It is not even owned by Richard personally. Prentice snatched the document up. His eyes scanned it rapidly. I saw the color drain from his face. This is a ground lease, Prentice whispered. Correct, Saul said. A 99-year ground lease, to be specific, but with a very unique clause. I looked at Brandon. Son, do you remember when you signed the papers for the house? You were so excited about the low interest rate, you didn't read the rest of the stack. Brandon looked up, his eyes wide with fear. What are you saying, Dad? I am saying that Sterling Land Holdings LLC owns the earth under your feet, I explained. And because I wanted to help you, I drafted a lease agreement for the land. You were paying $1 a year to rent the land from my company. $1, Tanya scoffed. So what? We will pay you the $1. Here is $1. She reached into her purse and threw a crumpled dollar bill onto the table. Saul shook his head gently. I am afraid it is not that simple, Mrs. Sterling. You see, the lease had a renewal clause. It required the tenant Brandon to explicitly renew the land rights every 3 years. If not renewed, the lease expires automatically. Prentice looked at the date on the document. He looked at his watch. He looked at the calendar on the wall. It expired. Yesterday, Prentice muttered. Saul nodded. Precisely. As of midnight last night, the ground lease for 124 Maple Drive has terminated. Sterling Land Holdings has decided not to renew the lease due to hostile relations with the tenant. Tanya slammed her hand on the table. Stop talking in riddles. What does this mean? It means, Tanya, I said, leaning forward, that you own a house, but you have nowhere to put it. Prentice dropped the paper. He slumped back in his chair. He knew exactly what it meant. It means, Saul clarified, that you are currently trespassing on my client's land. The structure you claim to own the house is an encroachment. Under the terms of the expired lease, you have 30 days to remove your personal property from the land. Remove the property, Brandon stammered. You mean move the furniture? No, Mr. Sterling, Saul said. The house is the property. You have 30 days to pick up the house and move it to a different plot of land. If you fail to move the structure, ownership of the improvements reverts to the landowner. That is Article 9, Section C. Tanya looked at Prentice. Tell them they are lying. You cannot just move a house, actually. Prentice said, his voice weak. You can. It is expensive. It costs about $100,000 to lift a house and transport it. And you need a new lot to put it on. But we don't have a new lot, Tanya screamed. And we don't have $100,000, then Saul said, closing his folder. I suggest you vacate the premises, because right now you are squatting on corporate property. And unlike a residential eviction commercial, trespassing is handled very quickly. I watched Tanya's face. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone, replaced by the sheer crushing weight of reality. She looked at the deed in front of her. The piece of paper she thought was her golden ticket was now worthless. So I said, standing up, Here is my counteroffer. You drop this lawsuit. You drop the partition action. You sign over your 50% share of the structure to me today. In exchange, I will not sue you for the cost of demolishing the house, which I will likely have to do since it is an eyesore." "Demolish it," Brandon whispered. "But it is my home." "It was your home, Brandon," I corrected him. "Now it is just a pile of wood sitting on my dirt." Tanya looked at Brandon. "Do something." Brandon looked at me. He looked at the man who had raised him, the man who had paid for his college, the man who had tried to give him everything. And he finally realized that he had burned the bridge while he was still standing on it. "We have no choice, Tanya," Brandon said, his voice breaking. "We have to sign." "I am not signing anything," Tanya yelled. "I am not walking away with nothing." "Then you will walk away with a bill for demolition and a judgment for legal fees," Saul said calmly. "Mr. Prentice, explain it to her." Prentice sighed. He began to whisper frantically to Tanya. I heard snippets. No leverage. Airtight contract. Ground lease controls. We will lose. Tanya listened. Her face went pale, then red, then a sickly shade of gray. She looked at me with pure venom, but I saw the defeat in her eyes. She grabbed the pen from Prentice's hand. She did not read the settlement agreement Saul pushed toward her. She just slashed her signature across the bottom line. There she screamed, throwing the pen at me. "Take it, take the damn house." "It is a piece of junk anyway," Brandon signed next. He did not throw the pen. He set it down gently. "I am sorry, Dad," he whispered. I did not answer him. I picked up the papers. I checked the signatures. Everything was in order. "Gentlemen," Saul said. "Thank you for coming." I walked out of the conference room without looking back. I heard Tanya sobbing behind me, a loud, ugly sound of frustration. She wasn't crying because she lost her home. She was crying because she lost the game. We walked to the elevator. Saul pressed the button for the lobby. "That went well," Saul said. "It did," I agreed. So Saul asked, "Are you really going to demolish the house?" I thought about the house on Maple Drive. I thought about the memories of Brandon growing up before Tanya, before the greed. "No," I said. "I have a better idea. The structure is sound now that I have the windows fixed. I think I am going to repurpose it. Repurpose it for what I smiled. You will see." I had reclaimed my land. I had reclaimed my house. And most importantly, I had severed the tie that was draining my life. The lawsuit was over. The family was broken. But for the first time in years, the foundation under my feet felt solid. Now there was just one final loose end to tie up. The partition action was settled, but the emotional debt was still unpaid. And I knew exactly how to balance that ledger. It involved the final destination of that house on Maple Drive, and a phone call to a few of my old engineer buddies who were looking for a place to retire. The conference room was quiet, but it was the silence of a structure just before it collapses. The air pressure had dropped. The load-bearing beams of Brandon and Tanya's marriage were groaning under the weight of the truth Saul had just placed on the table. Saul Cohen, my attorney and oldest friend, adjusted his glasses and looked at the young couple with the kind of pity a butcher has for a lamb. He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished oak table. It stopped right in front of Brandon. "This is the notice to quit," Saul said softly. "It is a formal demand for the removal of your personal property from the land owned by Sterling Land Holdings." Brandon stared at the paper. His hands were shaking so badly that when he tried to pick it up, it fluttered like a dying moth. "Removal of personal property." Brandon whispered, his voice cracking. "You mean our furniture? Our clothes?" "No, Mr. Sterling," I said. I leaned forward, locking eyes with my son. "I mean the house." Tanya made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "You are insane," she spat. "You cannot ask us to move a house. It is a house. It has a foundation. It has a foundation that sits on my dirt," I corrected her. And as Saul just explained, your ground lease expired at midnight yesterday. You are currently trespassing. I have a developer coming in next month to survey the land for a new project. I need the lot cleared." "Cleared?" Brandon asked, tears welling up in his eyes. "Dad, you are talking about bulldozing my home." "I am talking about clearing my land," I said calmly. "The house is your asset. The lease agreement clearly states that upon expiration, the tenant, that is you, Brandon, has 30 days to remove any improvements made to the land. If you want to keep the house, you need to hire a structural mover, jack it up, put it on a flatbed, and drive it to a new lot." I paused, letting the reality sink in. Of course, finding a new lot in this market might be tough, and the moving costs usually start around $100,000. "Do you have $100,000, Brandon?" Brandon put his head in his hands. He looked small. He looked like the little boy who used to hide behind my legs when it thundered. But there was no thunder today. Just the cold, hard facts of a contract he had never bothered to read. "We don't have $100,000, Brandon mumbled into his palms. "We don't have anything. The bank froze our accounts. We spent the last of the cash on the hotel." "Then you have a problem," I said. "Because if the structure is not removed by November 1st, ownership of the improvements reverts to the landowner. That is me, and I will charge you for the demolition costs." Tanya stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh screech that made everyone flinch except me. She was trembling, but not with fear. She was trembling with a rage so pure it was almost impressive. She turned to their lawyer, Mr. Prentice. "Do something," she screamed. "You are supposed to be a lawyer. Stop them. They are stealing our life." Mr. Prentice sighed. He closed his briefcase. "Mrs. Sterling, I have reviewed the ground lease. It is ironclad. Your father-in-law, Mr. Sterling, he locked this up 20 years ago. There is no legal maneuver here. The land is his. The lease is expired. You have no leverage." "No leverage!" Tanya repeated, her voice rising to a shriek. She spun around to face Brandon. "Did you hear that, Brandon? We have no leverage because your father, the man you said was a senile old fool, just outsmarted you. Tanya, please," Brandon begged, reaching for her hand. "We can figure this out. We can. We can find an apartment. We can start over." "Start over." Tanya pulled her hand away as if he were contagious. She looked at him with a look of absolute disgust. I have never seen a look like that before. It was the look of a predator realizing its prey has no meat on its bones. "I did not sign up for this, Brandon," she hissed. "I did not sign up to live in a studio apartment with a man who cannot even pay for a cruise ticket. I did not sign up to be homeless because you were too stupid to read a contract." "Tanya, stop!" Brandon cried, tears streaming down his sunburned cheeks. "I did this for us. I tried to stand up to him for you." "For me," Tanya laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "You did not do anything for me. You did it because you are weak. You let your daddy pay for your degree. You let him pay for your car. You let him buy you this house. And the one single time you tried to be a man, you failed. You failed completely." She grabbed her purse from the table. She ripped the diamond engagement ring off her finger. It was a nice ring. I knew exactly how much it cost, because I had loaned Brandon the money to buy it 5 years ago. She threw the ring at him. It hit him in the chest and bounced onto the floor, rolling under the conference table. "I am done," she said. "I am not going down with this ship." "Tanya, wait!" Brandon stood up, knocking his chair over. "You cannot just leave." "We are married, not for long," she said coldly. She looked at me then. Her eyes were hard, flinty. She did not look ashamed. She looked calculating. "You win, Rick," she said. "You wanted to destroy him. Congratulations. He is all yours. I hope you two are very happy together in your misery." She turned on her heel and walked out. The door slammed shut behind her. the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. Brandon stood there, staring at the closed door. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. His wife was gone. His house was gone. His dignity was gone. He slowly sank back down into his chair. He put his head on the table and began to sob. It was a raw, ugly sound. The sound of a man who has lost everything he thought defined him. Mr. Prentice stood up awkwardly. I think my services are no longer required here. I will send the final bill to the hotel address. He hurried out, leaving us alone. Me, Saul, and my weeping son. Saul looked at me. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question. Do you want a minute? I nodded. Saul gathered his files and quietly slipped out of the room. I sat there for a long time listening to Brandon cry. I watched his shoulders heave. I watched his hands clench and unclench. Part of me, the part that remembered teaching him to catch a baseball, wanted to reach out. Wanted to tell him it would be okay. Wanted to write a check and fix it all like I had done 100 times before. But then I heard the vibration of my phone in my pocket. Phantom vibration. I remembered the text. Dad, Tanya says you are too old. Family only. I remembered the look on Tanya's face when she mocked me at the party. I remembered Brandon laughing along with her. I stayed in my chair. I did not reach out. I sat with my hands folded on the table, watching the structural failure of my son's life. It was a necessary collapse. You cannot build a skyscraper on a swamp. You have to drain the swamp first. Dad, Brandon choked out, lifting his head. His face was a mess of snot and tears. Dad, please. I am sorry. I am so sorry. She is gone. I have nothing, please. I am your son. I looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes. You are my son, I said quietly. That is true. And because you are my son, I owe you the truth. I stood up and walked over to the window. I looked out at the city skyline. You thought love was a transaction, Brandon, I said, keeping my back to him. You thought you could take what I gave you and discard the person who gave it. You thought I was a resource, not a father. No, Dad. I never... Brandon stammered. Stop, I said sharply. I turned to face him. Do not lie to me. Not now. You stood in that living room and laughed while your wife called me a walking wallet. You boarded that ship and left me behind like unwanted baggage. You made your choice, Dad. I was wrong. I see that now. You see it because you are broke, I said. You see it because the check bounced. That is not repentance, Brandon. That is desperation. I walked back to the table and picked up the notice to quit. You have 30 days, I said. November 1st. I want the lot cleared. If the house is still there, I will demolish it and bill you for the removal. But where will I go? Brandon whispered. I have no money. I have no wife. You are a man with a college degree and 2 working hands, I said. I suggest you use them. Get a job, rent a room, figure it out. I walked toward the door. Dad, Brandon screamed. You cannot leave me like this. I am your family. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I looked back at him one last time. Family only. Brandon, I said. Remember, I opened the door and walked out. I walked down the hallway to where Saul was waiting by the elevator. He looked at me, searching my face for signs of regret. Are you okay, Rick? He asked. I took a deep breath. The air in the hallway was cool and conditioned. It felt clean. I am fine, Saul, I said. Did he sign the surrender papers? He will, I said. He has no choice. He cannot move the house. He will sign it over to me by the end of the week to avoid the demolition fees. And then what Saul asked as the elevator doors opened. What will you do with the house? I stepped into the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. I am going to give it to someone who actually needs it, I said. Someone who understands the value of a roof over their head. We rode down in silence. My heart did not hurt. It felt steady, strong. It was the feeling of a load being properly distributed. Brandon was alone in that conference room, but for the first time in his life, he was truly free. He was free of his wife's manipulation. He was free of my enabling. He was free to sink or swim on his own merits. I had not destroyed him. I had stripped away the scaffolding so he could finally learn how to stand. And if he fell, well, that was gravity. And gravity, as every engineer knows, is the one law you cannot negotiate with. I walked out of the building and into the autumn sunshine. I had a lunch date with a contractor. We had a lot of work to do. After all, November 1st was coming fast, and I wanted that house ready for its new occupants before the first snow fell. The Aegean Sea is a different color than the Caribbean. It is a deep royal blue, almost like ink, and when the sun hits it, it looks like shattered diamonds. I am sitting on the terrace of my villa in Santorini watching the sunset. I have a glass of vintage wine in my hand, the kind that costs more than Brandon's car payment used to be. It has been exactly 1 year since I stood in that cold conference room and watched my son sign away his claim to the house on Maple Drive. People often ask me if I regret it. They ask if I miss the house. They ask if I miss the Sunday dinners that were filled with silent tension and fake smiles. I take a sip of wine. I look at the horizon, and I tell them the truth. You cannot miss a tumor once it has been cut out. You only feel the relief of the pain being gone. The house on Maple Drive no longer exists. That is not a metaphor. It is a literal fact. After Brandon and Tanya vacated the property, I walked through the empty shell one last time. The wind was whistling through the plywood boards I had nailed up. The floors were scratched from where they had dragged their furniture out in a panic. It smelled of failure. I realized then that I could never live there. I could never rent it out. That structure was infected with the memories of my own blindness. I had built it with love, but it had been occupied by greed. So I called a demolition crew. It took them 2 days to bring it down. I sat in my truck and watched. I watched the excavator claw tear through the roof. I watched the walls crumble. I saw the master bedroom where Tanya used to sleep till noon, while I paid the bills turn into a pile of splintered wood and drywall. When the dust settled, there was nothing left but the dirt. My dirt. The market for empty lots in that zip code was hot. A developer from New York called me 3 days later. He wanted to build a modern, eco-friendly duplex. He offered me $2.1 million for the land. Cash. I signed the papers without a moment of hesitation. That money is now sitting in a trust fund, not for Brandon, but for the engineering scholarship I started at my alma mater. Every year, 4 kids who cannot afford tuition get a full ride. They send me letters. They call me Mr. Sterling. They treat me with more respect in a single letter than my son did in 10 years. Speaking of Brandon, I saw him a few months ago just before I flew to Greece. I was stopped at a red light in the downtown district. I looked over at a landscaping truck in the lane next to me. And there he was. He was sitting in the passenger seat, wearing a neon yellow vest, covered in grass stains. He looked 10 years older. His face was thin, and he had that hollow look of a man who is perpetually tired. He was eating a sandwich wrapped in foil, staring blankly out the window. For a second, our eyes locked. I saw the recognition hit him. I saw him straighten up. I saw the shame flood his face. He started to raise his hand, maybe to wave, maybe to beg. I do not know. The light turned green. I did not wave. I did not honk. I simply pressed the gas pedal of my new convertible and drove away. I later heard from a mutual friend that he is living in a basement studio apartment. He works 6 days a week. He is drowning in debt from the legal fees and the divorce. He tells people that his father abandoned him. He tells people he is a victim. But he is learning. Slowly, painfully, he is learning that the world does not owe him a living. Maybe, just maybe, that struggle will make a man out of him eventually. But I will not be there to see it. I have retired from the job of raising him. And Tanya. Her fate was perhaps the most poetic of all. She got what she wanted. She found a man with money, a lot of money. She remarried 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Her new husband is a 70-year-old real estate mogul. He is worth millions. But there is a catch. I know this man. We move in the same circles. He is known for 2 things: his wealth and his absolute controlling paranoia. Rumor has it Tanya signed a prenuptial agreement that is thicker than a phone book. She gets no allowance. She has no access to his accounts. She has to provide receipts for every single purchase down to a tube of lipstick. She lives in a golden cage. She posts photos on Instagram of her new mansion, but she cannot even drive the cars in the driveway without his permission. She traded a father-in-law who loved her for a husband who owns her. I hope she enjoys the view from her new prison. As for me, I have never been freer. I finished my wine. The sun has dipped below the water, now painting the sky in shades of violet and orange. My phone buzzes on the table. It is a text from my group of friends here on the island. We are meeting for dinner at a taverna down by the water. Fresh fish, good music, and conversation that does not revolve around who is paying the bill. I pick up my phone. I scroll past the blocked numbers, past the old life. I stand up and stretch. My back does not hurt anymore. The stress that used to sit on my shoulders like a yoke is gone. I remember that text Brandon sent me a year ago. Dad, this cruise is just for us 3. Tanya says you are too old. Family only. I walk to the edge of the balcony and look down at the sea. They were right. I was too old. I was too old to be used. I was too old to be disrespected. And I was too old to pretend that blood is thicker than water. I raise my empty glass to the empty ocean. To family, I whisper. But not the family you are born with. The family you choose. The family that respects you. And most importantly, the family you find within yourself when you finally have the courage to walk away from the people who hurt you. I found my family. It is here in the peace of this evening. It is in the laughter of my friends waiting for me. It is in the scholarship students who are building bridges because of me. And it is in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I did not just survive the storm. I became the storm. And then I cleared the air. I put the glass down. I grab my jacket. I have a dinner to get to, and for the first time in a long time, I am not paying for everyone else. I am just enjoying the meal. This is Richard Sterling signing off. And if you are listening to this, remember one thing. Your value does not decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. Sometimes you have to tear the house down to see the sky again. Through this journey, I learned that being a parent does not mean being a doormat. For years, I confused enabling with loving. I thought that by giving Brandon everything I was securing his future, but I was actually crippling his character. The hardest thing a parent can do is let their child fall, but sometimes that fall is the only way they learn to stand. True family is not defined by DNA or shared last names. It is built on mutual respect and gratitude. If that respect is missing, you are not building a legacy. You are just financing your own disrespect. Walking away was not an act of cruelty. It was the ultimate act of self-respect. If you agree that respect is a two-way street, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice. Let me know in the comments if you would have demolished the house or given them a second chance.